Good morning, everyone. It is 9:45 on a lovely Friday morning here in the center of the state. Anyway, I hope it is where each of you all are. Welcome to Friday SUNYLA and the Taking Faculty Development online presentation. As you will have noticed when you logged in, the session is being recorded and everyone enters the room muted. If you have any questions or comments, please enter those into the chat and our presenters will address them either on the fly or at the end of the session. The recording and the slides, although now the slides have already been shared, amazing, no waiting. The recording and the slides will be available on the conference website in another week probably or so, and registrants will be notified when those are posted. My name is Susanna. I'm today's moderator, and I'm just about done with everything I'm going to say. Our presenters today are our SUNY colleagues, Danielle Apfelbaum and Fatoma. Danielle is a member of the library faculty at Farmingdale State College, where she serves as the scholarly communication librarian. And Fatoma is the acquisitions librarian, also at Farmingdale State College. She oversees the library liaison program, is the head of the collection development committee, and manages the library's social media accounts. Welcome again, and now over to our presenters. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Susanna. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us bright and early on a Friday. We appreciate it. We've made it to the last day of SUNYLA. So before we begin, we actually just want to take a moment for a land acknowledgement and recognize that Danielle and I are both presenting from Farmingdale, New York, which is on stolen land that belongs to the Massapequa people. The Massapequa people spoke Algonquin, and they were part of the original 13 tribes of Long Island who inhabited Long Island before they were colonized. We encourage everyone here to explore the land and or territory you are currently located at and to learn about the original inhabitants of the land. I'm going to drop a few links in the chats to help you learn more. And once again, this is just us since we're virtual. A little reminder, again, I'm Fatoma. I'm here at Farmingdale State College. I oversee acquisitions. You can find me on Twitter. I'm active, so feel free to reach out there afterwards if you have any questions or want to connect.
Hi, I'm Danielle Apfelbaum. I'm the Scholarly Communications Librarian at Farmingdale State College. And if you want to learn more about me too, you can just check out my Instagram account. And if you have any questions for us in our roles, we're happy to address them at the end. So welcome. In the comments, we would like you to introduce yourself and tell us where you are in your journey in terms of developing faculty programs online. So if you feel comfortable doing that, please definitely feel free to share. This way, as we're going through the program, if we see something relevant to where you are, we'll definitely highlight that.
So we're just going to quickly go over just our learning objectives and what we would you all can look forward to for this session. So we'll give you an overview, which is we're going to go over our AAA framework. We'll go over that in a bit and explain what it is and how it helped us with our programming. We're going to do a breakdown of Gagne's 9 events of instruction. We're going to provide you all with steps and examples so you can put forth these frameworks into practice on your own. We're also going to take a little bit of time to go over fears that are associated with presenting online and strategize how to combat these fears. And then we'll discuss the value of post-session reflections and follow-up. So let's take a time to very briefly, think about what life was like about a year ago. So we had all survived an emergency shift to remote work and teaching. We were facing a budgetary crisis. Faculty and staff were learning new programs pretty much almost overnight. And as librarians, we still had to carry on supporting our institutions remotely, and in our case, remotely and in person as well. So libraries across everywhere, we're trying to do the best that we could. We're learning how to make do with what we're used to, stretching out our limited resources and still helping our patrons. So this was a time where libraries and librarians really had to market what we do. We had to really let everyone know what we do for our students, our faculty, our campus. And one thing that our campus definitely needed was faculty development. It wasn't really anyone's fault. There was just so much happening that it just wasn't being focused on. So on our campus, our faculty development series actually take place in the library, and it's overseen by our director. So Danielle had stepped in with workshops she created to support our faculty, and then I decided to do a few as well. These workshops were a chance not just for helping our faculty, but as a way for us to showcase all the resources the library had, how these resources could be used in their classes, and remind the campus of the skill sets each one of our librarians hold and how we could help them. This was a chance for us to be creative with our roles, creative with the skills and resources we have, and to step into a bigger role to support our faculty in an area that nobody was seeing support in. So we couldn't give them the traditional workshops, but we did instead was we switched to remote, which allowed us to reach a larger audience and show them that we were here to support them and highlight the tools that are available to them. Next slide.
So building a more affordable course with OER and library resources was the first faculty development program that I took online. And even though it did happen right in the middle of the upswing of the pandemic in our area, it actually had been planned as an online offering well in advance of that. And there is a backstory to that that I'm sure anyone who's tried to host a program for faculty can relate to. So I was brought on in my position to educate faculty about open access and open educational resources. And since starting my position, I had hosted several in-person workshops, all with honestly abysmal attendance. I can say that I'm not surprised that my workshops weren't well attended. There's a lot of competition with teaching schedules, with meeting schedules, and so on. That said, it's still a lot of preparation that goes to waste when nobody attends your workshop. So I told our director that I was no longer doing in-person workshops and that I would host the workshops that I was expected to create and deliver online from now on. And she was actually really supportive of this. And I think it is worth mentioning, and Fatoma touched on this before, that our director is also the director for our Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. If you have a similar structure or you're looking to do something similar, pitching your online workshops as a way to take some of the burden off of a learning and teaching center's responsibility for finding and scheduling program is a really great first step to establishing buy-in if you're facing some resistance or skepticism maybe in your own department. So then COVID hit. The week that I was slated to deliver this program in March was actually both spring break and the week that all faculty were expected to convert all in-person classes to all online classes. And needless to say, I really did not expect anybody to attend given what everybody had to do in that particular week. But I still ran the workshop and I was floored when over 20 faculty members attended. We're a small institution. It's a good attendance rate if you get 4 or 5 people in a workshop. So having over 20 was just mind-blowing. And ultimately the responses were really positive. And I think that had to do with a number of reasons. First, I delivered the session using Blackboard Collaborate, which was one of the modes of delivery that faculty were now expected to use for their synchronous online courses. And many told me that it was really helpful getting to be on the student side of this technology. It also opened up an opportunity for me to assist faculty with trying out the technology and getting comfortable with it for their classes. And this really resulted in faculty seeing me in a new light, and not just as a librarian, but as somebody knowledgeable about instructional technology, which is actually what my second master's degree is in. Second, before I even did the online workshops, I'm big on takeaways. So I always provide the presentation, which I've provided to you. And please, you're free to modify and use all of these materials however you would like if you'd like to run a similar workshop. And now I could have provided a recording of the session as well, which I was able to share with those who couldn't attend the sessions. Finally, I was able to share a digital copy of a workbook that allowed faculty to review the content of the session and actually operationalize it into a workable plan for locating and incorporating openly licensed materials and library licensed materials into their courses. Finally, the session helped faculty think about how they might solve a very real and difficult problem that they were facing, getting no-cost course materials to students who could neither depend on the physical library for reserves nor afford to purchase the text. We had such a great turnout for this workshop that we ran it again in June, July, and August, and we had a combined total of over 45 registrants across those 3 workshops, which again is pretty big for our normal attendance when we do have attendees. So considering how successful the March, June, and July programs had been, I wanted to experiment with offering online programming that focused on supporting scholarship as well. So having participated in online writing groups and online writing sprints pre-COVID, I knew that this was the kind of program that I could get up and running with confidence. We tested it over 3 days in July, and while the 3 separate days had been scheduled to give participants an option to attend at least one of the days, the surprising result of that was that several participants participated in all 3 days. And it was so well attended that we ran intersession sprints, spring sprints, and another round of summer sprints. And I've completed, I have provided some sample slides for you as well, so you can see what the structure is like and the things that we went over. Actually, as we speak, I'm running a sprint today. So when we're done with this presentation, I'll be running a check-in. So the program itself is pretty simple. Each day kicks off with introductions and a couple of tips, and then we have 3 2-hour working blocks, in between which participants check in and share their progress. All I do is facilitate. So based on feedback from participants, I also designed a summer program to kick off the sprints called Your Most Productive Summer Workshop. And overall, the positive feedback has really centered around the value of bringing faculty together in the summer, the sense of community that this creates, and an appreciation for having a highly structured day built around making progress on writing projects.
Sorry, I was muted. So I wanted to think of a way to help faculty with their professional development. And originally I was thinking of sending them titles or articles to help them, but then I changed it around to make it more interactive, and I turned it into a workshop. So at the time I was actually talking to Danielle about this. The issue we're coming up with is I'm in charge of collection development and I oversee the textbook reserves. When our campus shut down, our students no longer had access to that material. Over the summer, we're still closed, and it was really hard for us to explain to faculty why every single textbook we had in the library doesn't exist in our e-collection. So there was a lot of back and forth just trying to explain how publishers work, why things aren't available. And it kept coming up that if they could try to switch to OERs, it would help solve this. So I wanted faculty to realize the importance of OERs, since they all saw this issue come in full force. And switching to remote, I decided to have a book club using an OER. The idea was having the faculty interact with the OER, using the links, going through our library, seeing how easy it is and how we can help set them up with OERs. Hopefully they will then be able to put that into their own classes. Being on the receiving side of OERs as the student, sometimes they think, oh, it's going to be too hard since it's just something new. So that was my whole shift, to do the workshop to get them to interact with one another, learn how to use the OER, and then to use the topic of performing a cultural audit of a class. I didn't have them read the whole book because it's summer, everyone's pressed for time. So I selected a very specific chapter that was very relevant at that time. So this was in June of last year. The presentation highlighted the importance of accessibility, free resources, and then they also had the slides as well as more OER books that they could use for their professional development. Throughout the workshop, I let them know that we have a scholarly communications librarian. I highlighted Danielle's information, who was okay with it. So that way they knew that they could contact myself or Danielle or just the library if they did want to use more OER. So the workshop went well, and I too was shocked. This was in the summer, and our faculty are technically off at that time, and this was on a Friday. So it was in the middle of a Friday, and we had over 20 people as well, which was, like Danielle said, really big for our small institution. This was also a chance for some faculty to get to virtually see and chat with one another after going through a whole semester of being remote. They appreciated this space. So in addition to evaluating things throughout the presentation, I gave them the space to explain their own feelings, what they did, what they couldn't do, what concerns they had. It became more of a vulnerable space for them that they appreciated, especially for our new faculty who never met anyone. So for that reason alone, I had chosen to not record this session, just so they could feel more comfortable. This was a little bit more of a collaborative talk and take situations away scenario. But for future, I did realize the benefits of recording it. Next slide. So for the next workshop that I did. I hosted it in fall, and this was after the summer, and the campus was still online. There was a huge push from administration that we need to be more interactive with student engagement. And there was actually like a pushback from students, and they themselves were saying that they want more interaction, they want more engagement, and they feel very isolated. So during the summer, I actually took a bunch of workshops, and I took a course for technology and higher education, which came in really handy. The professor was great. I was able to hold on to his contact information, and I was able to meet a lot more coworkers and colleagues throughout SUNY. So it created a new network of individuals that I was able to reach out for, and I was able to learn about a lot of tools that could help our professors. So this was a need that was needed on campus, and there's no budget. So I was able to search through and see what is out there for free or for free trials that could help our faculty. So once again, there was a need for something. This time it was helping faculty or any instructors. And this workshop turned into more of a crash course. And this one was recorded. We went over tools, applications, or even how to meet with student clubs. Some of them are advisors, or they have to coordinate student clubs. So in this presentation, I try to get as many different tools as possible, and I kept in mind that most faculty will need the free version. So I highlighted that with each tool or app that I had. I also reached out to faculty or instructors that I either knew personally or had worked with in the past, or a student had told me about what they were doing in their class that they really enjoyed and appreciated. So dropping names of specific instructors and departments throughout the presentation definitely made a big of a difference. It kind of turned into like a hook to get them more engaged. And as I introduced the different apps and tools, I would try to think of how it would be relevant. So I definitely tried to acknowledge almost every department within it. And that usually helps people feel a little more seen. And for this one, recording was shared, all the slides were shared, as well as resources and feedback form. Next slide.
So when developing faculty program, it's really important to consider how your talents, expertise, and knowledge in concert with the resources available to you can help solve a problem that faculty might have. So for me, developing the Building a More Affordable Course workshop was really built on the premise that this workshop could answer the pressing question of how do I get my students reliable disciplinary content now that they cannot use the library's physical reserves and may not be able to afford to purchase their textbooks. I also think that it's really important not to underestimate your talents and your expertise. If you're having difficulty identifying something to focus on for your programming, think about the things your colleagues have asked you to teach them. Think about the problems with which people often come to you in your position. Ask your colleagues for feedback, and really important, get in the habit of telling your colleagues when you recognize expertise or skills that they have that might make a great workshop.
So at the time of my first presentation in June, there was a lot of talk about how we can create equity in the classroom. And equity and diversity is something that's very important to me and I'm very aware of and try to incorporate. So although I don't have the proper title training for it, it's something that I am passionate about, and I was willing to use my personal experiences on campus to describe the importance of doing a cultural audit of a classroom. So the argument for not creating these spaces or training usually falls on money and budgetary constraints, which was why I specifically chose an OER to show that we have access to the resources, and the individuals in that workshop can now be new colleagues or friends or allies that they can reach out to and collaborate with to continue working towards creating culture aware classes.
For both of us, I think collaboration has been a really huge part of our success. I'm not an acquisitions librarian, so I am not an expert in everything that goes into acquiring and processing items for our collection. And although we run separate programs, Fatoma's knowledge and expertise in this area has really been crucial for me, especially with all the changes that COVID's brought in terms of our budget. Our continuous collaboration has really helped me to find a way to help faculty understand the constraints of acquiring materials, and that this is something that they really need to consider when selecting materials if it's important to them that the library has a physical or digital copy of their requested or required readings. Now, a number of years ago, I had the opportunity to present a short program on how I come up with faculty and staff programs. And I realized that when I actually stepped back from my process and kind of put it under a microscope, it actually offers a flexible framework that can be used to help others get started crafting programs of their own. So for me, the process begins with 3 A's. The first is assets, which are the tools, talents, and resources that you're able to share with your audience. Angle is the message that articulates the way in which your assets are going to help your audience address an interest, a challenge, problem, or need. And your audience is a population in your community with a shared interest, challenge, problem, or need. What I really like about this framework is that you can start with any A that's most solid and build from there. So just as an example, let's say that you love Academic Search Complete. It's your favorite database. That's your asset. Now let's consider your audience. Let's say we have new and junior faculty who are just beginning to build a body of research, and we have senior and tenured faculty looking to secure full professorship. Although we're looking at the same exact database, we have 2 very different angles from which we can approach program development because we have 2 very different audiences. For junior faculty, Academic Search Complete might be part of solving the problem of conducting and saving searches across multiple EBSCOhost databases. For senior faculty looking to quantify impact over the course of their career, Academic Search Complete might be one of many resources that help solve the problem of locating and downloading citations to their existing body of work. Now, this framework is something that I also relied on while crafting the writing sprints. So in this case, I started with my audience. I knew I wanted to target new and junior faculty because we have greatest access to this group through our Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. I also knew that even pre-COVID, a shared challenge that impacts faculty over the summer is making space and protecting time to work on publications while revising existing courses, developing new courses, and trying to balance all of this with, just enjoying your summer. In this case, I considered myself, as well as my access to and knowledge of Blackboard Collaborate, as the asset. Before COVID, I had participated in virtual writing groups and sprints. And again, I understood how they worked, how to structure them, and what it took to run them online. And finally, as far as the angle, I simply made sure that I structured the sprint descriptions in a way that spoke to the challenge, which was not only making and protecting space for writing, but also fleshing out the professional development section of their tenure portfolio. So I'm going to do this in my best commercial voice. This is the actual workshop description. Stalled on a writing project? Need a boost to get that manuscript started, fleshed out, or wrapped up? Join our virtual writing sprint. Hosted by Professor Danielle S. Apfelbaum, Scholarly Communication Librarian, the virtual writing sprint will provide a full day of empowerment, accountability, and strategies for making immediate progress on a writing project of your choice. Be sure to include the event in the professional development section under Scholarship tab in your Axiom portfolio.
So for oops, sorry, my slide just turned off. Sorry. So for my target audience, I wanted all of the instructors on campus. I didn't care if they were full-time, part-time, adjunct, tenured. I just wanted every instructor to be able to have access to all of the tools just to help their students. So I knew there were instructors who were all struggling with student engagement. And over the summer, I was able to brush up on my skills from what was needed, and I took it originally to help our IL classes because I knew this was a new shift for us, but not everyone did that over the summer, and our campus didn't offer extra training. So for that reason, I had a really good target audience, and my assets came for me through that class. I used Google Hangout because that was what I was most comfortable with, and it was a great way for them to be able to talk to each other. Blackboard Collaborate I like to teach in, but for workshops, I personally choose Google Hangout. I added what they were expected to do, and I gave them the space to share their concerns, success stories, and that definitely gave them the framework to be able to be more open, and that helped hook the instructors to stay till the end. So my angle, again, like Danielle mentioned, even though it was open to all instructors, we do try to pull out the, hey, this is professional development and you can add this to your profile. And this workshop description was, I don't have a good commercial voice like Danielle, so engaging students online can be a challenge. What can we do to help our students stay engaged, create a relationship with their students and to create this relationship from a distance. This session will introduce various websites and web-based tools that you can adapt for your classes. There will be time for individuals to share what has been successful in their classes, and participants will walk away with the tools that they can test for implementation in their own classes. Remember that this workshop can be added to your professional development section in the scholarship tab in Axiom.
I think that was a great commercial voice.
Thank you, thank you.
So when designing programming, it's really important to consider the prior knowledge attendees are bringing into the program, because it can be a barrier to their understanding the focus of the session. So for instance, I always have to address faculty misconceptions about open access and open educational resources before I can teach them what they are and how to find them. So ultimately, you just want to consider this. What do faculty already know? What do they not know? And for me, this has been the most important. What do they think they know, but really do not know? Also, don't try to do everything. Around 5 learning objectives for a 1-hour development session is really more than enough. You can always design an advanced version of the session. Another tip, prime your attendees for buy-in. One thing that I've learned is that when faculty attend sessions, they're not always invested in the content. And when designing your session, plan to make explicit the ties between the content of the program and a positive impact on faculty tenure portfolios or classroom experience. One way I'm able to do this effectively is through our RSVP list. We ask faculty to identify their department when RSVPing to events. And so I can actually look at that in advance of the workshop and tailor my resources and examples to content that my faculty are focused on in their disciplines. Where possible, I try to provide hands-on interaction, and if you can't, just provide clear next steps. I have to admit, my OER session is jam-packed, but I do incorporate clear next steps into the workshop by not only showing faculty how to find the resources, but I take them through every step needed to successfully add the content to Blackboard. I never assume that they're experts on Blackboard, although at this point, many do know exactly how to do this, but I walk them through the whole process. I also provide them with a workbook for after the session, because you're not going to gather everything that you need for an entire class in 1 hour. This allows them to go over the major points of the session. It provides them with a checklist for searching for OER, as well as library licensed resources, and it gives them a week-by-week chart to map out and organize OER and library resources by the learning objectives that they'll support. So if you're new to teaching faculty or new to teaching in general, figuring out how to do the things that we've been suggesting can be a little bit overwhelming. But by now, we really like frameworks. So we want to share Gagne's 9 events of instruction, which is a really helpful model for putting these tips into practice. So when I started my academic librarian position, I also started pursuing my master's degree in instructional technology. And it was at this point that I was introduced to several instructional design models, one of which was Gagne's 9 events of instruction. As someone who did not learn how to teach one-shots in library school, this particular instructional design model was really helpful for me in structuring my information literacy sessions. It also proved really helpful when structuring my faculty programs. I've found that most instructional design models tend to speak to the design of an entire course, but this model can easily be scaled down to address what could be taking place during a single instruction session, whether it's for faculty or students. So I'm just going to go over each of the 9 events. So the first event is gain attention. You can do this in a number of ways, from basic introductions to facilitating an icebreaker activity. The second event is informing learners of the objectives. Now, I know that people have strong feelings about the use of objectives and that the point of objectives is generally to identify assessment activities, but adult learners respond really well to understanding what they're going to be asked to do and why they're asked to do it. So sharing objectives can really help adult learners understand if their expectations of the session are in line with what the session will actually cover. If you're not familiar with writing learning objectives, it's important to remember that they're not a list of activities or general topical areas that will be covered. Objectives state what the learner will be able to do at the end of the session. So for example, from our objectives list, at the close of the session, you will be able to identify and describe each event in Gagne's 9 events of instruction. The third event is to stimulate recall of prior learning. So learning something new is often easier or less intimidating if you can connect it with something you've already learned. Be aware though, and I've mentioned this before, prior learning isn't necessarily accurate or aligned with what you are about to teach. So you may have to use this as an opportunity to get on the same page about particular concepts or topics before you proceed with the next event, which is presenting the content. Pretty self-explanatory. Content is just any information or processes that are going to be learned by the participants. The fifth event is providing learning guidance. This consists of any strategies in which the participant can engage to learn the content. The sixth event is eliciting performance or practice. So this requires the participant to engage with and practice with the material that's presented in event 4, which is presenting the content. The seventh event is providing feedback. So based on the participant's performance, the facilitator or the instructor at this point can reinforce previous strategies or introduce new strategies based on the participants' experiences. The eighth event is assessing performance, which requires determining if the participants are achieving the learning objectives. And the final event is enhancing retention and transfer to the job. So this is originally a training model, just want to point that out. Even though I think it's very applicable to what we do. So enhancing retention requires connecting the content and the practice to real world applications. Now you may have noticed the little arrows on this outline of the 9 events of instruction. This is not a part of the original events. I added this because I often find that depending on the type of session you're presenting, you may want to cycle through presenting content, providing learning guidance, eliciting performance, and providing feedback a few times instead of overloading the participant with all of the information and all of the activities at once. So what does this look like in practice? So in my building a more affordable course session, the 9 events play out like this. I gain attention by encouraging everyone to type their introductions into the chat, and I do have check-in questions throughout the presentation. I inform learners of the objectives, which in this case include locating and sharing library resources through Primo, sharing library resources with students via Blackboard, and locating and sharing open access and open educational resources via Blackboard. I stimulate recall of prior knowledge by highlighting that what faculty already do in locating, evaluating, and incorporating resources into their courses is applicable to expanding those resources to include openly licensed and library licensed materials. I also need to contend with the fact that prior learning may mean that we're not on the same page about what openly licensed and library licensed means in the context of the presentation. So I acknowledge that the definition that they're likely to already hold may not necessarily be the same as what I mean in this session. I present the content using Prezi, which is a fuller discussion of the nature of and difference between openly licensed and library licensed resources, as well as how to navigate each of the platforms that will allow you to look for these resources. And because the participants have access to the Prezi, this serves as a scaffold that provides learning guidance. I elicit performance by asking participants to choose one of the platforms that have been demonstrated, conduct a search in it for materials with a specific course in mind, and then share their experience. In response, I provide feedback about what they're doing effectively and alternate strategies that they can try if they're encountering some specific difficulties. And rather than administering a formal assessment, I take time to assess performance by considering overall what participants are getting and what they're not getting. I do this by reiterating select points from the session. Finally, I enhance retention and transfer by showing how to incorporate the materials I've found using the platforms that are demonstrated and how to incorporate them directly into the learning management system. And again, I provide a workbook that serves as a step-by-step guide that incorporates content from the session into the process of locating and selecting materials for an actual course.
So in my performing a cultural audit of your class, the 9 events played out like this for me. So I gained attention by encouraging everyone to type their introductions in the chat as I explained the norms of the session, and this was a reminder for them that this is how they can gauge interest in their own classes. So that was a good talking point as well, and it got them all involved. I informed learners of the objectives by having an overview of what the presentation will be about right in the beginning. And I always like to remind them in the beginning that there will be examples and that they will have access to the slides and the resources. So that way that question calms them down and they know that they don't have to absorb everything immediately. I stimulate recall of prior knowledge by connecting them to current events. So for reference, this took place last June, and there was an overwhelming amount of workshops, talks, readings, everything, just telling campuses that they need to incorporate anti-racism and equity in their classroom, but there wasn't much action-based plans to help everyone navigate all of that. So I tried to frame it in a way where we all want our students to succeed in their classes and in their undergrad careers, and we want that classroom and campus to be a safe space. So this is going to help them work towards achieving that. And I wanted them to recall what they do in their classroom right now and to analyze it, and then think of how we can pivot it and better address the needs of our students. So that way it wasn't overly critical, but more constructive, and they were able to reflect back and work on what tools they had access to make things better for their students in the class. So I presented my content using Google Slides and an open access book that was shared with the participants before the session. We analyzed what was in the reading and how it can be used in our respective learning spaces and classrooms to make the spaces better for our students. The participants had access to the presentation, and they were given further resources to learn more and expand their knowledge of a cultural audit, which helps provide learning guidance. And I elicited performance by having participants do sample audits throughout the session. So I had pictures, thankfully, from numerous classrooms throughout campus, different buildings, different spaces on campus, different spaces in the library. And I also had access to a few different institutions' Blackboard homepages, as well as some Farmingdale ones. So we were able to look at those, and I allowed them to freely give feedback, talk back and forth, and then I would step in when things needed to be addressed. And together as a group, we worked through auditing the spaces and evaluating the spaces. So as they shared their evaluations, I had the feedback and if there was any areas missing, and I had a follow-up feedback form with the participants to see what they got out of the workshop. During the workshop, I try to do informal assessments and take notes about how they're responding and what they're saying. And in the end, I enhanced retention and transfer by sending up follow-up emails. That was a great way to stay in touch with them. Many still reach out if they need more information. And the email also includes prompts and reminders on how we went about auditing in the session, so that way they can do it on their own as well. Next slide. So when creating these programs, you want to work with what you have. There's no need to add any extra stress to your own workload. We all have enough to do, so work with what you are comfortable with. For example, our institution, we use Blackboard Collaborate, Google Meet, and Microsoft Teams. Danielle had chosen to teach in Blackboard Collaborate. That's what she was comfortable with. I personally chose to teach in Google Meet. That's what I'm comfortable with, and that's what I thought would work best. Technology is technology, and you shouldn't underestimate the importance of practicing to use the softwares or programs before your session. So just as we practice before our presentations or even our IL classes, if your workshop is going to be hands-on virtually, give them the time to test out their tools as well, let them know what they'll need, and always have detailed directions. It's best to not assume that this is something that's common knowledge. Take a step back and think of steps for someone who has never been exposed to a tool. And it also makes it a lot more equitable for everyone in the chat. No one will feel bad if they weren't sure how to do something. I suggest creating norms. My sessions were different. The first one was less technical and was more about what can be done to meet the needs of your students. So before starting my session, I made sure the ground rules and norms were there in writing. I went over them with the participants so they understood. My second session was more of an overview of technology in the classroom, but I still felt that it was helpful to have the norms in the beginning just to help set the tone for the workshop. This was something that was new to a lot of the faculty, and it acted as an example for them so they can start thinking about creating these for their own classes as well. And finally, we want to stress that it's okay to not know everything, and it's completely fine to say that in a presentation. And sometimes we feel that we have to have all the answers in a presentation or in a class or a workshop, but we're all human, and it's fine to say, I'm not sure. You can always let people know that you can follow up to their questions. You can ask for their contact information, let them know that you'll look into it, and you'll get back to them. It's not expected that you have to know everything. I think that's just something that we can help ground ourselves with and be okay and normalize saying, I'm not sure, I'll follow up with you. Next slide. All right, so because technical aspects of presenting are often the most intimidating, we wanted to take some time to help you think about these particular facets of presenting online faculty. So you can grab your notebook, open up a Google Doc, or just sit there and absorb all of it and try to answer these questions and get yourself thinking a little. So what presentation platforms are available to you? And what do you need the platform to do, and can it do those things? So at our campus, we don't have the option of presenting in Zoom, but we have Blackboard Collaborate, Google Meet, and Microsoft Teams. So if you also have multiple different options, you want to consider what you need for your workshop, what you'll need from that platform. Do you need breakout rooms? Do you need the ability to mute people and turn off cameras? Do you need polling options, and et cetera, et cetera? Do you need the ability to for people to call in on their phone if they can't get online? So take time to do an inventory of what you need, and then go through the different platforms that are available to you. And if possible, try to see if one or more of the platforms can be used. What fears do you have about using these platforms? So most fears about presenting can be reduced by learning more about our practicing more and learning more about the platform. So when you list out your fears about presenting online, you create a roadmap for working around or completely preventing obstacles. So for example, if you're afraid that you'll get kicked out of the platform while presenting, make sure you have the link handy in a doc or a sticky note on your computer so you can quickly get back in. Oftentimes when I teach an IL class, I actually put everything in a notepad, and in the notepad, I'll have Blackboard link to slides, password, all of those things right there. So that way, if I do get kicked off, I just copy paste, and it's a lot easier than having to search through emails or your calendar. I also test out links or presentations with colleagues. If you think back to last year when we were all a little anxious about teaching online, a lot of us were working with each other and doing practice Blackboard sessions. So do what you think will help alleviate some of your anxiety about working with these online, and make a bit of a map for yourself on how you can overcome them. I should also note that at some point we all suffer that fear that something will go wrong. It's okay if it does. One thing that I sometimes I did this past year is when I did get a glitch or if something broke down, when I was done, I would just email all my colleagues and be like, hey, today Blackboard did this. And I just explained what went wrong. So that way, if anyone else ever has that issue come up for them, they'll remember what the workaround was for me. You know, I don't want them to have to go through the same thing. So the key to getting over the fear of technology is, just embrace the fact that something might happen and it's okay. So you can make a plan for it. And every time something happens, just pause and ask yourself, did I do anything that caused the tech issue? And most of the time, the answer will be no. It's something that we can't control. It was the technology itself. It was technology, not you. So that issue is not a reflection of yourself or your competence.
We did not talk about this, but I also do the notepad trick. I put I put the link to this meeting in the notepad and the link to our slides so that, everything is handy and you're not relying on anything in the actual technology to remember it for you in case something happens. So
it's very funny because right now I have my notepad with our Zoom links, our slide links, and it's because I like to close out all the browsers. So it's just this.
Exactly. Yes, I do the same thing. It really does help. Another thing you want to think about is who can help you learn more about and test out the platform. So if your institution has a preferred or more than one preferred video conferencing platform, there is likely somebody at your institution who is not only knowledgeable, but responsible for helping those on the campus use it. So reach out to IT, reach out to your distance learning offices to figure out who that person or group of people might be if you have questions. It may not be immediately available, but if you ask around, you will eventually find out who is available to help you with these products. Also, think about who might serve as a support buddy during your first session. So just like we have a moderator for this session, having a support buddy when you do this the first couple of times can be a tremendous help, because juggling multiple things in your sessions, like talking, moving slides, and sharing links is a lot. And having a buddy in charge of something like letting people in, if you're using Zoom and you have a waiting room, and sharing links as you mention them, can be really helpful for both you and your buddy, because you get peace of mind knowing that somebody's taking care of that while you're presenting, and your buddy also gets to get additional experience with the platform. So if you have the option to, ask, can somebody serve as a buddy for my session? And then you can return the favor. Like, it's a really good learning experience. So finally, it's important to remember that the programming doesn't really end when the program is over. Continually improving as a session designer and facilitator means taking time to think about what worked, what didn't work, and how you can adjust your session for an even better experience for future participants. It's also a time to let go of whatever issues arose that were out of your control. So for instance, every so often I do get an attendee who has not read the workshop description and has not paid attention to the learning objectives, and I cannot control the level of preparation an attendee brings to the workshop. And if I know that I have reiterated at multiple points throughout the session what the session is about and what the participants should be getting out of it, there's no reason that I should beat myself up over the fact that I am not meeting the expectations of an attendee when those expectations are clearly outside of the scope of the description of the session. One of the biggest wins I see coming from taking faculty development online has really been the immense response that I've received from attendees in terms of maintaining a connection with me. I always provide my email during the session, and I don't just tell them that they can follow up with me. I really have an entire spiel of all the things that I can help them with and all the things the library can help them with, so that it's not just about following up with me about the content of the session. So for instance, one attendee reached out to me after a session because after a year of working at the school and not being able to access our remote library resources, he finally felt comfortable reaching out and asking me about the issue. And we realized it was really a simple fix that our access services librarian was able to make in like a matter of minutes. It's also really important to follow up with participants, and this can look different depending on what you're comfortable with and your needs. So if you're trying to build up a formal program that you might want to request funding for in the future, or if you plan on highlighting your workshops as a feature in your reappointment, promotion, or tenure portfolio, you need some kind of data that points to the value of the workshops you're offering. And it could be, there are a number of options. It might just be the number of registrants. That gives a good idea of the interest in it, or it could be a detailed survey. If you're doing your workshops on behalf of another department, like a Center for Teaching and Learning, you should definitely have a conversation about who's going to be responsible for surveying the faculty that attend. And if it is the department, you can, should, and are totally entitled to ask for a copy of the feedback for your specific session. So where do you go from here? We recommend taking time to conceptualize your program using the AAA method. Then if you're not used to designing faculty development sessions, or you want to try something a little different than you're used to, give Gagne's 9 events of instruction a try. After you run your program, take some time to reflect on your participants' responses to the offering, but also take some time to think about how you felt about the execution of the program. Think about what went well, what didn't go so well, and what you'd like to try differently in the future. Finally, once you've created a program, share it. Coming up with new programs, especially for faculty, can be really overwhelming. And even if you don't feel like your program was necessarily successful for your audience, sharing your experience could provide some major inspiration and resources for other librarians for whom your program might be a really good fit at their institution.
So we want to acknowledge that Danielle and I are both in a very special and lucky situation where the director of our library is also the head of the department that puts together the faculty training workshops. So she has access to all of the faculty and all the instructors on campus, and she also oversees other departments within our building. So she has all of the contact information, and when our workshops are put together, she is able to email everyone in one shot or in a few emails. So we wanted to highlight a few workshops that have been presented at SUNYLA this year. So these all looked great. They had something to do with outreach, and when the recordings come out, we definitely suggest watching these and trying to incorporate those outreaches those outreach methods in your workshop. And that's about it. We wanted to leave time and space for any questions or comments or feedback to hear back from you all. You can unmute yourself. It's a pretty small enough group where I think we should be fine. Or you can also drop it in the chat as well.
Why do you think so? Why do you think attendance was so good at your OER workshop? I think COVID really just drove home how inaccessible many materials are. I think it really forced faculty to realize that many of their students were not purchasing the textbooks, even though they may have been showing up with the assignments in past classes. I think they got a fuller understanding of just how many students were probably utilizing our reserve collection for many of these courses. And that wasn't available when we closed. And I think that that really drove home how many students necessarily don't purchase the text or cannot purchase the text.
And for my workshop, which also touched on OER, it really was also, I pulled on a lot of, it's really important for time and relevance. At that time, our faculty really missed each other and they wanted that connection. And there was a lot going on in the country in terms of social justice. So this was the one time that our campus addressed something like that in terms of training. So I tried to pull together everything we had access to just try to feed that need that was needed on our campus.
Hi, can I just jump in? I know I'm the room host, so I'm not really in as a participant, but I feel really lucky that I happen to by default have to attend your presentation this morning. It was excellent. I've got some great ideas. I'm the Access Services and OER librarian at Monroe Community College, and I'm definitely going to pull some of the tips that you put in your presentation. I love the resources that you provided too. So I'm definitely going to put some of those into work. I think I've got some inspiration from you guys, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And if you ever want to touch base, if anyone wants to touch base with us after the presentation, I'm going to just pop my email address in here. Don't be afraid to reach out. This may not be something you're thinking about right now if you're not in the process of planning any presentations, but I tend to plan mine in July for the year. So if you get to a point where you do start your planning and then you have questions, just send us an email, and you're welcome to steal all the materials from my program for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Danielle. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and just, modify it however it works for you.
Yeah, like Danielle said, feel free to contact us. And I think it's funny because we're all librarians and we're so big on sharing information and everything. We kind of reinvent the wheel sometimes where, SUNY's, there's lots of librarians. I've definitely randomly emailed librarians who I've never met. So please don't hesitate to reach out, either one of us. It's definitely about collaboration. And since every library, we all know like the pain of working with limited resources and budgeting. So definitely just reach out. might be a little delayed, but we will get back to you. Definitely reach out and try to collaborate for all ideas. I think that's like the most beneficial thing we can take away from all of the library sessions we've had this year.
Yeah, exactly. I think just like you said, sometimes you're thinking, oh, I want to put this program together, but I'm not really sure. I don't know how to do it. And then suddenly you hear someone else, and you're like, that's perfect. That's just what I wanted to do, that I'm trying to figure out how to do it. So yeah, obviously a benefit of having these presentations so we can see what you're doing, and it looks great.
Yeah, thanks. And talk to your colleagues. This happened because Danielle and I was complaining to Danielle about how I'm so tired of telling instructors that not every textbook that's physical can be digital.
Right.
And then I was like, and if they talked to you, they would have had an OER. So we kept going. And then I was like, why don't we just teach them about this?
Yeah, exactly.
And and that's how it works. So definitely, like, inventing, sometimes you can get some really good ideas. Reach out to your colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Collaborating is so important because it just brings another dimension to, like I said, I'm not in acquisitions, so I often need Fatoma's help in articulating what the issues are to faculty in a way where they understand why the content that I'm showing them is going to be useful for them. So collaboration is really important. And also, don't underestimate your knowledge of anything in terms of how you can turn it into a workshop. So for example, like I did an entire workshop just on setting up scholarship alerts from EBSCO, ProQuest, and Gale. And a ton of people showed up for that too. And all it was just showing how once you do your search, you don't have to do it again and you can get new results in your inbox. And that, again, there was a lot of people who showed up for that. So don't underestimate, it might be a small thing, but it might be really important. So,
yeah, librarians are very humble. And I think if you just sit down and like allow yourself to be very uncomfortable and list out all of your skills and even just random things you know how to do, you can totally turn into a workshop. And in academia, a lot of those things are definitely needed. It's a different perspective. In librarianship, we do have to think of different things, whereas our faculty are sometimes stuck in just their specific area, and we can definitely help bring light to them. And Anne in the chat, she mentioned that she is also in charge of faculty development. So I'm excited to see what you put forth together.
Well, I'd like to add my gratitude to what you shared and compliments on how well you shared it and are clearly well prepared, and your timing was perfect. Well done. And you mentioned at one point in certain of your workshops, you intentionally do not record the sessions. Are there times, however, and just to ease scalability, really, are there occasions or topics that you do record and then make available to people according to their own schedules and interests, or?
Yeah, so the cultural audit was the only one I intentionally didn't, because there was a lot of sensitive topics in there, and I wanted them to feel comfortable, especially since they were tenure track faculty in their speaking. So there is always that little fear. For the technology one, though, that's something that's very versatile. And before I hit record, I let them know, just like in Zoom, like, hey, this is going to be recorded only for the purpose so you all can refer back to it, or if anyone needs it. And for the most part, I think people have been a lot understanding about it, just because of the whole nature of learning about online etiquette. It's been good. So it's definitely more of all right, if this is something of a very sensitive topic, maybe it's best to turn it off. And if not, and if it can be reused, then yeah, definitely record it. And it's also helpful for the reflective point. Danielle and I both realized that if you pause and reflect after you present, you learn a lot, which is why even for today's presentations, like we have a reference calendar, and on it I wrote, I can't do reference after this, because I usually like to pause even after workshop presentations, be like, all right, what worked, what didn't, what did I like, what can I do different, how did I feel? I think that's an aspect that we forget about, because it is doing that inventory of yourself immediately afterwards. It helps a lot. And I think that also can help us all with just like the confidence of presenting more as well.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. Thank you. Oh, and Anne has added a recommendation to join the Professional and Organizational Development Network. Very good.
That's great.
Yeah, that's a great resource.
Yes, thanks for sharing.
Well, thank you all for coming. I think we're actually at time, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for attending today. And we popped our email addresses in the chat, so do not hesitate to reach out to us.
Yeah, thank you all for attending. Enjoy the rest of your conference on Friday.